Hey, your viewers and viewresses, my name is General Red Strategist and welcome back to Sir You're Being Hunted. This is episode 356. Now, according to my little schedule that I just keep on my computer, which tells me basically what videos are hopefully going to be going out on which days, this should be the 23rd of December as of when this episode goes out. As of when I record this, it's actually a week or so beforehand. But yeah, so coming up to Christmas then, everybody. So I hope everyone's excited about that. Everyone's looking forward to a good little festive season, or at least a good few days at the very least. Because I think we sure as hell need it after the year that we've had this year. 2020 certainly feels like it's been a bit of a year to forget almost, with all the things that have happened in the world, namely COVID-19, things like that. But yes, here's to hoping that 2021 turns out to be better. But I'm not going to harp on too much about all that kind of thing, because I don't want to be talking about that so much until after Christmas, when I inevitably do my post-Christmas roundup, Sir You're Being Hunted video and all that. So yes, you've got that to look forward to, of course. I always do one of those every kind of year, as we kind of prepare, well, where I kind of reflect basically on how the festive season has been and all that. You can have that to look forward to. That'll come at some point, of course, after Christmas. However, there's actually something else that I really want to kind of talk about in today's episode. So obviously we're continuing on with the Turntables Challenge attempt number 2, which is great. We're here on the North Island. I think we need to just sort out this little building here, and then I think we've pretty much done the North Island. That's not too bad. That's good. Let me just get the ammo there. But really, what I'm kind of interested in talking about in this episode is something that I was actually reading up about just in my spare time before I started recording this. It's an evening as of when I record this. Things are quiet here. Obviously it's a Friday evening as well, so basically work is finished for the weekend and things are quieting down, like I say, getting very nice and relaxing. Looking forward to the weekend. Obviously it's very much winter now, we're in the midst of it, it's getting cold out there, but I'm in here nice and warm with Sir You're Being Hunted. And just after I'd done my work and as I was having my evening meal, having my dinner, my tea, I was doing a bit of reading online, and I read about kind of random subjects sometimes, just random things that sometimes I think I find kind of interesting. And I was reading about basically a subject which some of you might well be familiar with. You might have encountered this in your own reading and whatever else have you. And the subject in question is what we would call transhumanism, ladies and gentlemen. So transhumanism, for anyone who doesn't know, is a kind of philosophical movement, or a kind of set of ideas rather, I should say, which are essentially kind of concerned with how a kind of post-human society would look like and things like this. So, for anyone who kind of doesn't really know what I'm sort of talking about there, in essence, when we talk about kind of transhumanism and things like this, and the idea of a post-human society, we are often thinking about how technology today affects what it means to be human and affects how our societies kind of look like. And I was just reading up on some concepts within the field, and I thought they were very interesting, because it's always interesting to think about, when you look at things going on in the world, where might the future lie? What might the future look like? These kind of things. And transhumanism posits all kinds of stuff. As a kind of philosophical movement, it very much kind of proposes the idea that we need to think increasingly about what the human being is going to look like in this era of technological advancement. Because we've got all this with information technology at the moment being the big thing, the information revolution and all that. And at the same time we've got all this, we've got things like advancements in AI, stuff like this, and a big thing obviously in not just science fiction circles, but in philosophical circles and things like this, is this concern about what you call the technological singularity, that will reach a point at which technological advancement will just run away uncontrollably. And it can be interesting to think about what that means for human civilization and human society. And of course, people from different political viewpoints have always kind of proposed what they think the ideal solution would be in this kind of instance. So, for example, there's obviously a big debate at the moment around things like universal basic income, stuff like that. The idea that in a world where there's huge advancements in automation, in AI, in robotics, machines might well kind of start to really disrupt the world of employment and work in ways which in which mechanization hasn't really done in the past. And the fear then is that you will have a situation where, as automation disrupts traditional industries and creates massive upheaval economically, there won't be enough new kind of jobs to replace them, or new jobs that spring up to take advantage of increasing automation will be very specialist because they require great skills that not every human will have. And therefore, in that society, there would be a big fear of unemployment, mass unemployment, stuff like that, or people kind of struggling in low-paid jobs, things like that. I'm just going to jump cut here whilst I get back to the centre island, and then I'll resume chatting. And we're back in. So, to continue what I was talking about, yes, there's a big fear about mass unemployment and huge economic upheaval in the world of tomorrow caused by machines and automation and all that. And the topic of universal basic income has been proposed as one kind of possible future model for how we set up an economy. The idea that people would be given a kind of basic wage, a kind of existence wage, as it were, and everyone would receive that just to ensure that they have some form of income, even if they don't necessarily have work or employment because they can't find any as a result of economy shaking, technological advance and things like that. And that's just an interesting kind of thing. And you see how much of an effect that discussion, well, not how much of an effect, but the fact that discussion is becoming more and more prevalent in today's world. So I think it's in Finland, for example, that there was actually a trialling of a form of universal basic income scheme in one of its regions. I think it was Finland. I'm sure it was. Alternatively, was it Sweden? No, I think it was Finland. So there was that. And of course, fact is there are people on the political scene who are also talking about it. So for example, in the recent run-up to the US presidential election, although Joe Biden, of course, obviously got the Democratic nomination eventually, it's interesting to note that among the various individuals who put themselves forward as potential Democratic presidential nominees, you also had a guy like Andrew Yang, who a big part of his kind of campaign to become the Democratic nominee essentially hinged on his belief in the need for some kind of universal basic income. Obviously he didn't get the nomination, but it's interesting, it's just an example of the fact that this sort of topic is on the board and is being discussed. And transhumanism, of course, takes interesting, transhumanism will take account of that particular debate as among various others relating to how technology is going to shake up our society. And so transhumanists are kind of interested in how we might sort of integrate the human with the machine, with the cyber, with the informational system, to try and ensure that humans are not kind of left behind, as it were, by the advance of technology. And so, as I was kind of reading, okay, I'm going to jump cut here once again, everybody, as we go east. And we're on the East Island now. So, continuing on, of course, sort of transhumanists are interested in how we might kind of incorporate the technological with the human in order to create something much more sophisticated and much more well-suited to meeting the challenges of tomorrow. So think of it this way, I've always thought about, with the amount of kind of information technology that we have these days, in the form of, obviously, you have your smartphones, your computers that are now such small size you can fit them in your pocket. They give you instant kind of networked access to the internet. They give you instant access essentially to a digital realm full of information at your fingertips. And then, of course, you had a brief sort of flurry of things like wearable technology, taking it kind of a step further, like Google Glass and stuff like that, as well as other kind of non-internet, well, I say non-internet, but technologies which can be connected to the internet, though not necessarily always. So, for example, things like VR, things like Oculus Rift, Vive, stuff like this, wearable headsets, and things, these can connect to online games, and you can interact with people in the digital sphere. And so it's always interesting to think, okay, what's the next step in that respect? Where do we go from there? And possibly the answer to that is not so much wearable technology as actually an instance where the technology becomes part of the human body. And so in essence we're talking about things like technology implanted into the human mind, an interface perhaps between the human brain and some kind of computer, a direct interface, something that connects the two of them physically together. And isn't that kind of a fascinating concept? Like, on the one hand, imagine being able to, just wherever you are in the world, if you have some kind of connection in your head, you can basically mentally connect to some kind of internet, and just, it would almost act as this kind of extra sense, this artificial sense in your body, the ability to derive information from a network just using the power of your mind, and then to be able to interpret and analyse that information to reach all kinds of decisions and things like that. Imagine that future, how crazy and kind of exciting that would actually be. Now granted, there would be huge vulnerabilities and potential questions in that world, don't get me wrong, but that is potentially the next step that transhumanists believe might well occur in the future. Of course, it's thinking about how would our politics look like? What would our society look like? What would our economies look like in that kind of world? What's the effect that that kind of advance would have on those spheres? And I found it kind of fascinating, because another thing that I was reading related to transhumanism, so for anyone who doesn't know, here in the UK there's an academic called Colin Crouch who wrote a book, Post-Democracy, something like that, in which he looks at a lot of the phenomena happening in certain Western democracies at the moment, like lowering voter turnout rates, less and less engagement from citizens who are eligible to vote, and growing sort of apathy towards political processes, things like this. And he looks at those things and argues that we're moving to what he would call the post-democratic age, certainly in liberal democratic states, where our states and our societies have these instruments of democracy, but increasingly it starts to feel like they're a bit of a formal shell, so to speak, and that people aren't really engaging with them as much as they used to do. And as a result, political power and decision-making power increasingly is being held by smaller and smaller political elites, people who still are engaged, and they're still keeping they're the ones who have that power to make decisions. And so the big fear for the post-democratic state is that we've moved away from the old days of feudalism and of landed gentry, but have we basically moved towards a situation now where effectively we have a new form of aristocracy emerging, a new form of government, where instead of being really democratic, power is instead held by a series of small elites, people who are kind of a minority, or at least in some kind of minority group. And that's an interesting question to really consider in our society. Now, here's the thing, that's not to say that things could change, of course. It may well one day turn out to be the case that actually, is this a blip in the grand scheme of things? Could it be the case, in fact, that maybe one day voter turnout and things like that might actually go back up again? We don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it's an interesting question just to think about. And academics like Colin Crouch were just thinking about, okay, what can we do to prepare for this kind of world? How do we kind of create a society where more and more people are engaged? And it relates into these kind of transhumanist things, because technology could be a way of solving this. Imagine if you had sort of that fusion of the human and the machine that enables them to basically connect into networks, harvest information. It would radically shake up things like political education, potentially. Though, of course, I suppose the fear, obviously, then is as well as that there are huge potential opportunities for misinformation as well, and things like that. But it's interesting just to think about, like I say. And some of the solutions, of course, to things like these phenomena, this post-democratic phenomena that Colin Crouch came out with, some transhumanists and people of that kind of similar school of thought have proposed things like we need to look at how we shake up decision-making structures in our societies. We need to think about, instead of having a kind of necessarily a centralized authority that's kind of dominated by a small elite of people, how about we look for ways, where possible, to create alternate decision-making centres, decentralising authority and things like that. And so various solutions have really been put forward. Because if we are moving into that transhumanist age, potentially, then we could think potentially about how we create perhaps forms of deliberative democracy, where instead of really kind of being incredibly reliant on elections, or kind of prioritising elections as being the means by which we try and engage people in the system, why don't we instead create perhaps citizens' assemblies that are selected not through elections but by sortition, where instead you basically draw a pool of candidates who are supposed to be representative of a variety of views and perspectives in your society. Things like this. Now, sortition itself, of course, is a matter of debate. In certain respects that might work, and it might be quite interesting to get that broad range of people. It potentially might also undermine factionalism, because, factionalism certainly is a big thing at the moment in politics, which can be a bit of a problem when you have two parties that see it as very much a contest between themselves, and you end up with partisanship and people prioritising the interests of their own group necessarily over the interests of society as a whole. That can sometimes be a big fear, and the idea is that sortition and other methods might be a way of kind of solving that. But of course, as with any political issue, there's always a bit of a debate. There's always room for disagreement. And the thing is, people point to ancient democracies like Athens, where to some extent there was sortition in certain areas. But they also point out that the ancient Athenians didn't always use sortition for everything. For example, commanders in the military were not selected by sortition, because obviously the danger with sortition is that you might end up drawing people who maybe are not qualified to comment or to deal with certain aspects of politics or economics or whatever. And so, yeah, that certainly is the thing, and sortition wouldn't work necessarily in every context. But it's interesting just to think, like say, about these kind of questions. So yeah, I've kind of gone on a bit of a wandering discussion there about all kinds of things, ranging from transhumanism, technology, the evolution of the human, things like this, right through to sortition, alternate political structures, and whatever else have you. And really, that's just a summary of some of the things that I was kind of reading, some of the interesting elements. And there's way more to it than that, other things that we could talk about as well. And it's definitely a subject worth reading up on, I do think. But that's something that you can kind of read up on your own time, ladies and gentlemen. I'm garbling my words. And in essence, what I'm trying to say is, I just found it very thought-provoking. And like many political phenomena and debates, there's always more than one perspective on it. So whilst there may be certain advantages to be had from looking at things from that transhumanist perspective, there may well be things that lead to, there may well be sources of disagreement, things like that, that people look at and think, okay, as much as I agree with certain elements of this, maybe there are other elements which I don't agree with so much. But yeah, thought-provoking subject overall, and that's fine, for there to be multiple views. Because at the end of the day, isn't the ideal kind of society one where you have a perfect balance between all kinds of views? Because sometimes if one particular viewpoint is dominant over others, you always run that risk of everyone kind of living in the echo chamber, where they just end up reinforcing each other's views and not really challenging them. And that maybe is part of the problem, I suppose, with kind of factionalism in politics in certain areas today at the moment. People just get so kind of, stuck in their own space, and that they, just constantly drinking their own Kool-Aid, so to speak. Sometimes you need that person who challenges you to think, even if it doesn't necessarily end up with you changing your viewpoint. It's good to have it, just so that you can examine your own viewpoint for any potential weaknesses, or if there's anything that your viewpoint maybe isn't doing very well or is doing wrong, then you can amend it. And that's actually, I think, probably takes me back to a topic that I've talked about before in a Sir You Being Hunted episode, which was about debating, was it not? I mean, I feel like that was quite a while back, but I'm sure I did a Sir You Being Hunted episode on debating at one time. The art of debating, everybody. Personally, whenever I go into a debate, and, this is something that I feel like most people should do, really, is that whilst debating sometimes can be a means of ascertaining whether one particular viewpoint is the stronger one, is the strongest, or stronger than another, sometimes when you go into debates, it's good to be open-minded and to go in there not necessarily with the intention of proving yourself right, no matter what the cost, but sometimes to go in there just to learn more about the person on the other side and to find out what it is that motivates them. Why do they believe the things that they do? Because when we do that, surely that will lead us to a less confrontational and less aggressive world, might it not? Because if you can truly understand and appreciate where someone's coming from, then that potentially also makes them more human in your eyes. Because I think that a big problem with political debate sometimes today is that people say they're open-minded, but I feel like sometimes they're not really actually going in there open-minded. They're actually going in there just with the aim of proving that their own perspective is right, that the opposing perspective is wrong, and that anyone who basically believes in that opposing perspective is somehow committing some kind of transgression, not necessarily a crime, but is themselves doing something wrong, and that they're wrong, they're bad, this sort of thing. And that's a kind of dangerous thing sometimes, because if you constantly see the opposing side in that respect, the danger then becomes that you see them as an enemy, and you start to see political debate as some kind of war or fight, and that the person you're debating against is some kind of enemy to be defeated and overcome. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Yeah. And here's the thing, don't get me wrong here, I'm not singling out any particular ideological perspective for criticism here. I've seen evidence of this on lots of different sides of the debate, and it's worth just kind of reminding ourselves of that no matter how much you may disagree with something someone says, sitting there and kind of just not trying to make any effort to understand why they believe the things they do or where they're coming from probably doesn't help. And we've always got to watch out as well for the danger of that we come to see each other as not being kind of human almost, that we see each other as monsters, and we have to stop that. And to do that, I think we have to be careful with the rhetoric we use in political debate. We have to be careful not to insult one another or to regard each other as some kind of monster. And that may be hard. And sure, there are some ideologies out there and perspectives which are being aired currently in the world which we do find sometimes kind of a bit reprehensible. But even in spite of whether the view itself is reprehensible, I sometimes think that ultimately you win political debates by reaching out to the other side and trying to help them understand why they're wrong, or why you think, or why you disagree with their viewpoint. And for that you need a kind of civil discourse. And I think even if one side is sometimes refusing to engage in a civil manner, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily stop and therefore kind of stoop down to the level of mudslinging and things like that. Sorry, I'm really wandering with this discussion. We've gone in all kinds of directions. I don't really know where that even came from. I was just reflecting on things happening in today's world. Just some interesting thoughts. So that was quite a conversation, that was, wasn't it? Went in all kinds of directions. And hopefully you followed all my different trains of thought going on in there. I was rambling quite a lot. Started out with transhumanism, went to UBI, friggin' automation technology, civil discourse, sortition, alternate decision-making structures to engage people in the democratic process, stuff like this. But they're just thoughts, I'm sure people have their own thoughts on these things. So, you know what, we're going to wrap this episode up here, ladies and gentlemen. Haven't really done much of the challenge there, I was mainly just yammering away to myself. So, hope you enjoyed that. Hope it gave some food for thought, at least. even if you don't necessarily agree, and that's fine. But Facebook and Twitter links down below, along with a link to my propagandist channel, blah blah blah. You all know the drill by now. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. And I'll see you in the next part, ladies and gentlemen, which will be coming after Christmas. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, hey. Hello, waifu.
I know I shouldn't cry, but...
Well, you know, it's anime, isn't it? There has to be at least one, you know, pretty young female character who strips down to 100 pounds at some point. Whatever.
I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. Getting out of here anytime soon.
You got nice pantsuit, by the way. I mean, not that that's important. I don't know what possessed me to say that. You go for that sort of, you know, cute, white, pure, innocent look, are you?
It's impossible.
I'm sorry, I'll stop talking. It sounds very perverse and odd as I say it. Especially considering this character is probably supposed to be about, what, like 16, 17? And I'm friggin', you know, in my mid-20s.